What if the one meal you sacrificed tonight was actually the moment someone decided your entire future? Marcus Reed skipped dinner after working 2 exhausting shifts, thinking he was just helping an elderly couple caught in a bad moment. He didn't know their struggle was staged, their silence was watching, and their gratitude was something much bigger than it seemed. Because by the time that knock came at his door, everything he thought he understood about kindness, money, and opportunity was about to change forever. What he believed was just one small act turned out to be the beginning of a life no one ever offered him, until he proved he deserved it. And what happened next, no one saw coming. The neon sign outside Murphy's diner flickered like it was too tired to keep going, buzzing softly against the cold Detroit rain. Water ran down the glass windows in crooked lines, blurring the outside world into streaks of gray and yellow. Inside, the diner smelled like grease, coffee, and something warm that never quite reached the people who needed it most. Marcus Reed stood behind the counter, staring at the plate in his hands. A burger. Fries. Still hot. He had saved for this. 2 days of skipping lunch. 2 nights of walking home instead of taking the bus. 2 days of telling himself, just hold out a little longer. All for this one small moment. One meal he could sit down and eat like a regular customer instead of sneaking bites between shifts. He set the plate down near the register, the heat rising gently into his face. His stomach tightened, almost painfully, like it didn't trust the food was real yet. Don't let it get cold, Sandy called from across the diner, balancing a tray of empty coffee mugs. You earned it tonight. Marcus gave a small nod, but he didn't move. Something had pulled his attention away. Table 6. The corner booth, half hidden beneath a dim overhead light. It was usually where couples sat, leaning in close over milkshakes or whispering through long dinners. Tonight it held something different. An older white couple. They looked out of place not just because of their age, but because of how they carried themselves, even soaked from the rain, even sitting there with nothing but 2 cups of tea between them. There was something composed about them, like they belonged somewhere else. The woman, silver hair, pinned neatly even though strands had come loose from the storm, kept opening her purse, her fingers trembling slightly. Each time she searched deeper, faster, her breath growing shorter. The man beside her sat upright, his back straight despite his age, his coat damp and clinging to him. He reached into his pockets again and again, checking the same places like something might magically appear the 5th or 6th time. Marcus watched them longer than he meant to. He knew that look. Not the clothes, not the quiet dignity, but the moment when someone realizes they don't have enough. The moment when pride and panic collide. I don't understand, the woman whispered, her voice barely carrying over the low hum of the diner. I had it. I know I had it. The man didn't answer right away. He pulled out a small, polished watch, old, gold, expensive looking, and flipped it open like it might hold answers. It didn't. His jaw tightened. Sandy approached their table slowly, her usual easy smile replaced with something careful. She held the check in one hand, almost like she didn't want to let it touch the table. Folks, she said gently, I hate to interrupt, but... The woman looked up, her face flushed with embarrassment. We're so sorry. We seem to have misplaced our wallet. This has never happened before. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. The man stood halfway, then sat back down, his voice calm but edged with something heavy. Perhaps we can leave something as collateral. My watch or... Sandy hesitated, glancing toward the kitchen. Marcus followed her eyes. Big Mike was already watching, arms crossed, expression hard. Mike didn't run Murphy's with cruelty, but he didn't run it with charity either. The lights stayed on because rules were followed. No exceptions. He stepped out from the kitchen, his boots thudding softly against the worn tile. "Look," Mike said, not unkindly. "I'm sorry, but we can't do that. Not tonight." The man nodded slowly, like he expected it. "Of course," he said. "We understand." The woman closed her purse with shaking hands. For a moment she just sat there, staring at the untouched tea like it might somehow change things. Then she stood. Outside, lightning flashed, lighting up the parking lot in a harsh white glare. Rain slammed against the windows harder, louder, like it had something to prove. "They can't go out in that," Sandy muttered under her breath. But Mike had already turned away. Business didn't stop for weather, or for pride. Marcus looked down at his plate again. The burger was still there, still warm, still his. He swallowed, his throat dry. 2 days. 2 days of holding back, of waiting, of telling himself he deserved something small. His stomach tightened again, sharper this time. But then he looked back at the couple. The man had reached the door, his hand hovering over the handle. The woman paused behind him, glancing back just once, not at anyone in particular, but at the room, at the warmth, at the light, at what they were about to leave behind. Marcus felt something inside him shift. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just a quiet, steady decision. He didn't think about the walk home, or the empty stomach, or tomorrow. He just moved. "Sandy," he called out, his voice cutting through the hum of the diner. She turned. "Hold up!" The couple paused at the door. Marcus grabbed his plate. The heat from the food seeped into his hands as he walked toward them, each step feeling heavier and lighter at the same time. The man turned fully now, his pale blue eyes settling on Marcus with a kind of focus that made the air feel different. Marcus stopped at their table and set the plate down. "This one's on me," he said. Silence, the kind that fills a room without anyone noticing. The woman blinked rapidly, her lips parting. "Oh, sweetheart, we couldn't possibly—" "It's fine," Marcus said, pulling the plate a little closer to them. "I was just going to eat it anyway." The man didn't look at the food. He looked at Marcus, really looked at him. For a moment, something unreadable passed through his expression, something deeper than gratitude. Something measuring. "You worked for this," the man said quietly. Marcus shrugged, trying to keep it simple. "I can work for another one." Another silence. Different this time. Heavier. Then slowly, the man nodded. "Thank you," he said. Not rushed, not casual, deliberate. Marcus gave a small nod back, already stepping away before they could say anything else. Behind him, he could hear Sandy moving again, grabbing fresh coffee, her voice softer now. Marcus returned to the counter. The space where his meal had been sat empty. His stomach tightened again, but this time it felt different. Not just hunger, something else. He leaned against the counter, staring out at the rain-streaked window. Outside, the storm didn't let up, but something had changed. He just didn't know what yet. And in the corner of the diner, under the dim light, the older man took his first bite, his eyes never once leaving Marcus's reflection in the glass, like he had just found exactly what he was looking for. Or maybe, like the night had only just begun. The rain didn't let up. It followed Marcus all the way home, soaking through his thin jacket, slipping down the back of his neck, turning every step into something heavier than it should have been. The streets of East Detroit shimmered under broken streetlights, puddles reflecting flickers of neon and passing headlights like pieces of a life that never quite came together. He walked fast, hands buried deep in his pockets, not for warmth, but to ignore the emptiness in his stomach. Normally, he'd have something by now. even if it was just leftover fries from a shift or a piece of toast from the diner kitchen. Something to take the edge off. But tonight, there was nothing, just the echo of his own decision. "This one's on me." The words replayed in his head like they didn't belong to him. A car sped past, spraying water across the sidewalk. Marcus didn't even flinch. He kept walking. 3 miles. He'd done worse. By the time he reached Elm Street, the rain had softened into a steady drizzle, but the cold stayed. It clung to everything: the cracked pavement, the leaning fences, the tired houses that looked like they were holding themselves together out of stubbornness alone. His house was the third from the corner. The yellow paint had faded into something closer to gray, and the porch sagged just slightly in the middle. The porch light flickered as he stepped up, buzzing like it might give out any second. Marcus paused before opening the door. He took a breath, then another. Not because he was tired, because he didn't want her to notice. Inside, the air was warm, but not in a comfortable way. It smelled faintly of medicine and old wood, with a quiet hum coming from the oxygen machine in the corner. Angela Reed sat in her recliner, a blanket pulled up over her legs, the soft blue glow of the television washing over her face. The news played quietly, voices talking about things that never seemed to touch this part of the city. She looked up the moment the door opened. "There you are," she said, her voice soft but steady. "You're late tonight." Marcus forced a small smile as he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Yeah, busy shift." She studied him for a second longer than usual. Mothers always knew. "You eat?" she asked. There it was. Simple question, hard answer. Marcus shrugged, moving toward the kitchen like it didn't matter. "I grabbed something earlier." It wasn't a lie. Not exactly. He grabbed a glass, turned on the faucet, and let the water run longer than necessary. The sound filled the silence between them. Angela didn't press. She rarely did. But when Marcus glanced back at her, he caught the way her eyes lingered, just for a moment, like she was trying to read what he wasn't saying. "How was your day?" he asked, leaning against the counter. "Same as yesterday," she said with a faint smile, "and probably the same as tomorrow." Her hand rested lightly on the arm of the chair, fingers thin but steady. The oxygen tube looped gently across her cheek, disappearing behind her ear. Marcus nodded. They didn't talk about the doctor's appointments anymore, or the prescriptions that stretched further than they should, or the fact that half of them sat untouched because they had to choose which ones mattered most. Some conversations didn't need words. He moved closer, adjusting the blanket around her legs without thinking. "You cold?" "I'm fine," she said. "You're the one soaked." He glanced down at his clothes, still damp from the walk. "I'll change in a minute." She watched him again, that same quiet look. "You've been working too hard," she said. Marcus let out a soft breath. "Gotta keep the lights on." "They were on before you took 2 jobs." "Yeah," he said, a hint of humor slipping through. "But now they stay on." Angela smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You remember what I used to tell you?" she asked. Marcus leaned back against the wall, crossing his arms. "Which one?" "That being broke doesn't mean being empty." He looked at her. "I remember." She nodded slowly. "You've got more in you than most people out there, Marcus. Don't let this place convince you otherwise." He didn't answer right away, because part of him wasn't sure anymore. At the diner, he was just the guy in the back, the one nobody noticed unless something went wrong, the one customers talked past, not to, the one who worked twice as hard for half the recognition, even tonight. He shook the thought away. "It was just a long shift," he said. Angela tilted her head slightly. Something happened. Marcus hesitated. Then quietly he said, "There was this couple. Older. Got caught in the rain. Didn't have money for their meal." Angela's expression softened immediately. "And?" "I covered it." A small pause. Then she smiled. "Real this time." "Of course you did." Marcus let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "Yeah. You regret it?" He thought about that. The empty plate, the long walk, the hunger still sitting in his chest. Then he shook his head. "No." Angela reached out, placing her hand over his. "Good," she said, "because that's the kind of man you are." Marcus looked down at their hands. For a moment, the weight of everything, the bills, the job, the exhaustion, felt lighter, just a little. But as the night settled in, something else lingered in the back of his mind. The way the man had looked at him, those pale blue eyes, not surprised, not even just grateful, focused, like he was seeing something Marcus himself didn't. Marcus stood there a little longer, staring at nothing in particular. "You all right?" Angela asked gently. "Yeah," he said, though his voice was quieter now. "Just thinking." "About what?" He shook his head. "Nothing important." But that wasn't true. Because somewhere deep down, beneath the exhaustion and the routine, there was a feeling he couldn't shake. Like something had shifted. Like that moment in the diner wasn't over yet. And as the rain tapped softly against the windows, Marcus couldn't help but wonder. Why did it feel like someone had been watching him long before he ever noticed them? Morning came slow, not because the sun took its time rising, but because Marcus barely slept at all. The night had stretched out in pieces, short, restless moments of silence broken by the soft hum of the oxygen machine and the echo of thoughts he couldn't quiet. By the time the sky turned a dull gray, he was already up. The kitchen light flickered once before settling, casting a pale yellow glow across the small room. Marcus poured himself a cup of coffee, black, no sugar, and leaned against the counter, staring out the window at the wet street. Everything looked the same. Same cracked sidewalks, same quiet houses, same early morning stillness that made the world feel paused. But something didn't sit right. He couldn't explain it. Just a feeling, like a conversation that had started but hadn't finished. "You're up early," Angela's voice came from the doorway. Marcus turned slightly. She stood there wrapped in her robe, one hand resting against the frame, her breathing steady but measured. "Couldn't sleep," he said. She studied him, then nodded once. "That happens when your mind's louder than your body." Marcus gave a faint smile. "Guess so." "You going in early?" "Yeah. Mike asked if I could help with prep." That part was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. He didn't want to sit still, didn't want to think too much. Work was easier. Angela walked slowly to the table and sat down, adjusting the blanket around her legs. "You see that couple again?" Marcus shook his head. "Don't think so." "You thinking about them?" It wasn't a question. Marcus exhaled quietly. "Just something felt off." Angela tilted her head. "Off how?" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "They didn't act like people who were stuck," he said slowly. "More like people who weren't used to being stuck." Angela nodded, thoughtful. "Pride's a funny thing. Some people hold on to it even when it hurts." Marcus looked down into his coffee. "Yeah." But it wasn't just pride. It was the way the man looked at him. Like he wasn't surprised Marcus helped. Like he expected it. Marcus pushed the thought aside and grabbed his jacket. "I'll be back later," he said. "Be careful," Angela replied softly. Outside, the air was colder than the night before. The rain had slowed, but everything still felt damp, heavy. Marcus walked the same route he always did. Past the empty lot with the broken fence. Past the corner store where the owner barely looked up anymore. Past the bus stop, where people waited with tired faces and quiet impatience. The city moved around him like it always had. But this morning, he noticed things. A black sedan parked across the street from the diner, engine off, windows tinted. It hadn't been there before. Marcus slowed slightly, his eyes flicking toward it. Nothing moved inside. Probably nothing. He told himself that. Still, the feeling stayed. Murphy's diner looked the same as always, neon sign buzzing, windows fogged from the warmth inside. He pushed the door open. The familiar smell hit him instantly. Coffee, grease, something frying on the stove. "Morning," Sandy called out, tying her apron. "Morning!" Big Mike stood behind the counter, already moving like the day had started hours ago. He didn't look up at first. "You're early," Mike muttered. "Figured I'd help." Mike grunted. That was as close to approval as Marcus ever got. Marcus moved to the back, rolling up his sleeves, letting the routine take over. Plates, water, steam. For a while, everything felt normal, until Sandy's voice cut through. "Hey, Marcus." He looked up. "They were here earlier." His hands paused mid-motion. "Who?" She raised an eyebrow. "Your mystery couple." Marcus frowned. "They came back?" "Not exactly. They were outside, just sitting in a car." Marcus's chest tightened slightly. "Same car?" Didn't get a good look, but it wasn't broken down, that's for sure. He stepped closer. "Did they come in?" Sandy shook her head. "Nope. Just sat there for a bit, then drove off." Marcus glanced toward the window. The black sedan was still there. Parked. Waiting. "You think it's them?" he asked quietly. Sandy followed his gaze. "Could be. Or could be someone else." Marcus didn't respond, because something inside him already knew. This wasn't random. "Mike notice?" Marcus asked. "Mike notices everything," Sandy said. "He just doesn't always care." Right on cue, Mike's voice came from the counter. "Marcus." "Yeah?" "Stop daydreaming and get back to work." Marcus turned, grabbing another stack of plates. But his focus wasn't on the sink anymore. It kept drifting. To the window. To the car. To the feeling that something had shifted overnight. Around noon, the diner filled up. The usual crowd. Construction workers, office staff, regulars who didn't need menus. Marcus worked through it all, moving faster, quieter, letting muscle memory take over. But every now and then, he caught himself glancing toward the door. Waiting. Not sure for what. And then the bell above the door rang. Marcus turned instinctively. But it wasn't them. Just another customer. Still, his chest didn't settle, because the car was still there, and whoever was inside was still watching. Marcus tried to ignore it. He told himself it was nothing. Just another car. Just another person killing time between errands. Just another moment in a city full of people passing through. But the longer it stayed there, the harder it became to pretend it didn't matter. The black sedan didn't move. It didn't idle loudly. It didn't flash headlights. It just sat there, quiet and still, like it belonged to the street, but didn't belong to anything else around it. By mid-afternoon, the sky had darkened again. Clouds rolled in low and heavy, swallowing what little sunlight Detroit had offered that day. The diner lights flickered on earlier than usual, casting that familiar yellow glow across the worn booths and scuffed floors. Marcus wiped down the counter, his movements steady, but his attention kept drifting. The car was still there. Sandy followed his gaze again, lowering her voice. "You're going to wear a hole in that window." Marcus shook his head lightly. "Just thinking. About them." He didn't answer, because now it wasn't just about them. It was about what came after. "Look," Sandy said, leaning closer. "I've worked here long enough to know when something's weird. And this?" She nodded toward the street. "This is weird." Marcus let out a slow breath. "Yeah." Before either of them could say more, the front door opened again. The bell chimed. This time, it was them. Harold and Margaret. They stepped inside slowly. No rain this time, but the same quiet presence. Margaret's coat was dry now, perfectly arranged, her posture composed. Harold walked beside her, steady, his eyes scanning the room. Not lost, not uncertain, but aware. Very aware. The noise in the diner didn't stop, but it shifted. A few heads turned. Not because they recognized them, because something about them drew attention. Marcus felt his chest tighten. They weren't supposed to come back. Not like this. Sandy straightened slightly. "Well, that answers that." Harold's eyes found Marcus almost immediately. No hesitation, no searching, like he knew exactly where to look. Margaret followed his gaze, her expression softer, but just as focused. They didn't sit right away. Instead, they walked toward the counter, toward him. Marcus wiped his hands on a towel, suddenly aware of every movement, every second stretching longer than it should. "Afternoon," he said, keeping his voice steady. Harold stopped just a few feet away. Up close, he looked different. Not weaker, not older, stronger, more defined. The kind of presence that didn't need to announce itself to be felt. "Good afternoon," Harold replied. His voice was calm, measured. The same voice from last night, but now without the edge of desperation. Margaret offered a small, polite smile. "We wanted to thank you properly." Marcus shrugged slightly. "Didn't need to come back for that." "On the contrary," Harold said. "Some things deserve acknowledgement." The words sat between them, heavier than they sounded. Sandy glanced over, pretending to wipe down a nearby table but clearly listening. Marcus crossed his arms loosely. "You made it home all right?" Harold held his gaze. "We did." A brief pause. Then Marcus asked, "Car trouble get fixed?" Margaret and Harold exchanged a quick look. Too quick. "Something like that," Margaret said. Something didn't sit right. Marcus felt it again, that quiet shift beneath the surface, like he was standing in the same place, but not in the same moment. Harold reached into his coat pocket. Marcus tensed slightly. But instead of pulling out money, or a wallet, or anything expected, Harold placed a folded piece of paper on the counter, not sliding it, placing it, deliberately. "For your meal," he said. Marcus didn't touch it. "I told you," he said. "It's fine." "This isn't repayment," Harold replied calmly. "It's acknowledgement." Marcus glanced down at the paper, then back up. "I didn't do it for anything." "I know." The answer came too quickly, too certain. Harold's eyes didn't waver. "That's precisely why it matters." Silence settled again. Around them, the diner carried on, orders being called, plates clattering, coffee pouring. But at the counter, everything felt distant, like the world had narrowed to just this conversation. Marcus exhaled slowly. "Look, You don't owe me anything. Margaret stepped forward slightly. And you don't owe us an explanation for your kindness. Her voice was gentle, but there was something else behind it. Understanding. Or maybe recognition. Marcus finally picked up the paper. It wasn't cash. It wasn't a receipt. Just a simple note. Blank. Except for a single line written neatly across the center. Some choices echo longer than you think. Marcus frowned slightly. What is this? Harold didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced toward the window. The black sedan. Still there. Waiting. Then he looked back at Marcus. You'll understand soon enough. Marcus's jaw tightened just slightly. Understand what? Harold smiled faintly. Not warm, not cold. Just knowing. That last night, he said, wasn't as ordinary as it seemed. A chill ran through Marcus, subtle but undeniable. Before he could respond, Margaret placed a light hand on Harold's arm. Come, she said softly. Harold nodded once. Then, just like that, they turned and walked toward the door. The bell chimed again as they stepped outside. Marcus stood there, the note still in his hand. Sandy hurried over the moment they left. Okay, that was not normal. Marcus didn't respond. He was still staring at the words. Some choices echo longer than you think. Outside, the sedan's engine finally turned over. The low hum broke through the quiet. Marcus looked up just in time to see the car pull away from the curb, merging smoothly into the street like it had never been there at all. Gone. Just like that. Sandy leaned in closer. You think they're, I don't know, important or something? Marcus folded the note slowly. I think, he said, his voice quieter now. This isn't over. And as the last trace of the black sedan disappeared into traffic, one thing became clear. Whatever had started last night was only just beginning. The note stayed in Marcus's pocket all day. He didn't take it out again, not in front of Sandy, not in front of Mike, not even when he stepped outside for a breath of air between shifts. But he felt it there, a thin piece of paper that somehow carried more weight than it should. Some choices echo longer than you think. He didn't like how it sounded. Not because it was wrong, because it felt intentional. By the time evening rolled in, the sky had darkened again. Not with rain this time, but with that heavy, low cloud cover that made everything feel dim before the night even arrived. Murphy's diner filled up fast. Dinner rush. Plates clattered. Orders were called. The grill hissed like it was working overtime to keep up. The air thickened with heat and motion. People talking over each other. Forks scraping. Chairs shifting. Marcus moved through it all. Washing, stacking, wiping, repeating. But his focus wasn't sharp tonight. It drifted. To the note. To the way Harold had spoken. To that look in his eyes. You good back there? Mike barked from the counter. Yeah, Marcus answered, grabbing another stack of plates. Doesn't look like it. Pick it up. Marcus nodded, picking up the pace, letting the rhythm take over again. But then, the bell above the door rang. Something about the sound made him look up. Not just habit. Instinct. They were back. Harold and Margaret stepped inside again. Third time. Now it wasn't coincidence. The noise in the diner dipped just slightly, not enough for most people to notice. But Marcus felt it. This time they didn't hesitate. They walked straight to table 6, same booth, same spot, like they had never left. Marcus wiped his hands slowly, his eyes following them. Sandy leaned closer, her voice low. Okay. Now it's getting weird. Yeah, Marcus muttered. They coming back for more free food or something? Marcus shook his head. That's not it. How do you know? He didn't answer because he didn't know. But something in him said this wasn't about food anymore. Harold sat down first, his posture calm, controlled. Margaret followed, smoothing her coat before settling in. They didn't open menus, didn't look around. They just waited, like they knew what was coming next. Sandy grabbed a pad and walked over, her usual energy replaced with careful curiosity. What can I get for you? She asked. Just coffee, Margaret said softly. Sandy blinked. That's it? For now. Sandy glanced back at Marcus, then nodded. All right. As she walked away, she muttered under her breath. Same thing again. Marcus watched from behind the counter. Same order, same booth, same quiet presence. But nothing about this felt the same. He dried his hands slowly, then without thinking, he stepped out from behind the counter. Marcus, Mike called sharply. Where are you going? I got it, Marcus said, not turning back. Mike didn't like that. But for once, he didn't stop him. Marcus walked toward table 6. Each step felt deliberate, measured, like he was stepping into something he didn't fully understand. Harold looked up as he approached. Again, no surprise. Evening, Marcus said. Good evening, Harold replied. Margaret offered a small nod. Marcus stood there for a second longer than necessary, then said, Coffee's coming. Thank you. Another pause. Then Marcus asked, You come back here often? Harold's lips curved slightly. Not usually. But tonight's different. Yes, Harold said. It is. Marcus leaned lightly against the edge of the booth, lowering his voice. Look, I don't know what's going on here, but you've been here 3 times in less than 24 hours. Margaret's hands folded neatly in front of her. And that concerns you? Marcus met her eyes. It makes me curious. Harold studied him for a moment. Then he said, Curiosity isn't a bad thing. No, Marcus replied. But not knowing is. Sandy arrived with the coffee, setting the cups down carefully. Neither of them touched it right away. Marcus noticed that. Everything about them was controlled. Too controlled. You ever get the feeling, Marcus said slowly, like something's being set up? Margaret's fingers paused just slightly, barely noticeable, but Marcus caught it. Harold leaned back, his gaze steady. And what makes you think that? Marcus hesitated, because now that he was saying it out loud, it sounded different. Sharper. I don't know, he admitted. Just the way things line up. The rain, the timing, the car. You coming back? Silence. Not uncomfortable, but full. Harold reached for his coffee, finally taking a sip. Then he set it down carefully. Tell me something, Marcus, he said. Marcus stiffened slightly. You gave us your meal last night, Harold continued, without hesitation. Marcus shrugged. Didn't feel like hesitation. Most people would have thought twice. Most people aren't me. A faint smile touched Harold's face. No, he said. They aren't. Margaret looked at Marcus, her expression softer now. Why did you do it? Marcus leaned back slightly. He'd already answered that question, but now it felt different. Heavy rain, he said. No money, no way to get home. He paused. Didn't seem right to let you walk out like that. That's it? Margaret asked gently. Marcus nodded. That's it. Harold watched him closely, too closely, like he was measuring something invisible. And if you knew nothing would come of it, Harold asked. Marcus frowned. What do you mean? No reward, Harold clarified. No acknowledgement. No one watching. Marcus let out a small breath. Then it'd still be the same answer. Why? Marcus looked at him directly now. Because it was the right thing to do. The words hung in the air, simple, uncomplicated, but something about them landed harder this time. Harold leaned back slightly, his fingers tapping once against the table. Margaret exhaled quietly, and for the first time, something shifted between them. Not tension, not suspicion. Recognition. Marcus felt it. Didn't understand it, but felt it. Then Harold stood. Suddenly, smoothly. Marcus blinked. You leaving? For now, Harold said. Margaret stood beside him, her eyes lingering on Marcus just a moment longer. Thank you, she said again. Not for the meal, for something else. Something Marcus couldn't quite name. They turned and walked toward the door. The bell chimed softly as they stepped out. Marcus stood there, unmoving. Sandy rushed over immediately. Okay, I don't care what anyone says. That was not normal. Marcus didn't respond, because his chest felt tight again. Not from fear, from anticipation, like something was building. And you see the way he looked at you? Sandy continued. That wasn't just some old guy grateful for dinner. Marcus nodded slowly. I know. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one. And for the first time since the night before, the black sedan didn't come back. But somehow, that didn't make Marcus feel better. Because now the question wasn't who was watching him. It was, what were they waiting for? The question stayed with Marcus long after the diner lights dimmed and the last customer walked out. By the time he locked the back door that night, the air outside had turned sharp and quiet. No rain this time. Just cold. The kind that settled into your bones and didn't leave. He stood there for a moment, keys still in his hand, staring out at the empty street. No black sedan. No sign of them. Nothing. And somehow, that made it worse. Inside, everything had felt like it was building toward something. Like there was a thread pulling him forward, tightening with every word, every glance, every silence that said more than it should. Out here. It just stopped. Like someone had pressed pause. You coming, or you planning to sleep out here? Sandy's voice snapped him out of it. Marcus turned. She stood a few steps behind him, arms folded, jacket pulled tight around her shoulders. Just thinking, he said. You've been doing a lot of that lately. Marcus gave a small shrug. Feels like something's off. Sandy stepped closer, glancing down the street. That couple? Yeah. She let out a breath. You ever notice how people act when they're hiding something? Marcus looked at her. What do you mean? They overcompensate, she said. Or they hold back too much. Either way, it's not natural. Marcus nodded slowly. And them? Neither, Sandy said. That's what makes it weird. They stood there for a second longer. Then Sandy shook her head. Look, I've seen a lot of strange people come through that diner. But those two? She paused. They're not just strange. What are they? I don't know, she admitted. But whatever it is, it's not small. Marcus didn't respond, because deep down, he already knew that. Get some sleep, Sandy added, nudging his arm lightly. You look like you're about to solve a mystery nobody asked you to solve. Marcus gave a faint smile. Yeah. But as he walked away, her words stuck with him. Nobody asked him to. And yet, here he was. The walk home felt different tonight. quieter. Not just because the rain had stopped, because his mind wouldn't. Every step replayed the same moments. The way Harold stood, the way Margaret spoke, the way neither of them ever seemed surprised. And that note. Some choices echo longer than you think. Marcus reached into his pocket, pulling it out again. The paper was slightly creased now, worn from being folded and unfolded too many times. He stared at the words under the streetlight. They didn't change, but the meaning did. Each time he read them, they felt less like a message and more like a warning. When he got home, the house was quiet. Angela had already gone to bed. The television was off, leaving only the faint hum of the oxygen machine filling the room. Marcus moved slowly, not wanting to wake her. He set his keys down, slipped off his jacket, and stood there for a moment, listening. Everything felt normal. Too normal. He walked into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. Then, headlights flashed across the window. Marcus froze. The light moved slowly, sweeping across the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Then stopped, right outside. His chest tightened. Slowly he stepped toward the window. Careful, quiet. He didn't pull the curtain back all the way. Just enough. A car, dark, engine running low. Not the same sedan from before. Different shape, different size, but still, it didn't belong. Marcus watched for movement. Nothing. Just the faint outline of someone in the driver's seat. Waiting. For what? For him. His pulse picked up, steady but sharp. He stood there longer than he should have. Then, the engine cut. Silence. And for a moment, the world felt like it had stopped breathing. Marcus stepped back from the window. Something wasn't right. Not just strange, not just unusual. Deliberate. He glanced toward the hallway. Angela was still asleep. Good. He moved quietly toward the front door. Every step felt louder than it should. His hand hovered over the handle, then stopped. Because suddenly, he wasn't sure what he'd find on the other side. Another car, another stranger, or something he wasn't ready to face yet. A soft knock echoed through the door. Marcus froze. Not loud, not urgent. Just precise. Like whoever stood outside knew exactly how hard to knock to be heard. And nothing more. Another knock. Same rhythm, same control. Marcus swallowed. His hand tightened around the handle. For a second, he thought about ignoring it. About stepping back. About pretending he wasn't there. But something inside him, the same thing that made him walk across that diner floor, pushed him forward. Slowly, he turned the handle. The door creaked open just a few inches. Cold air slipped inside. And then, a voice. Calm. Familiar. Good evening, Marcus. His breath caught. He opened the door wider. And there he was. Harold. Standing on his porch like he belonged there. No rain, no weakness, no hesitation. Behind him, a man in a dark suit stood near the car, watching quietly. And suddenly, everything Marcus thought he understood about the last 24 hours didn't make sense anymore. Harold stood on the porch like the night belonged to him. No hesitation, no apology. Just that same calm presence Marcus had seen across the diner table. Only now, it felt sharper, more defined. Like the version from before had been held back. Good evening, Marcus, Harold repeated, his voice steady, almost conversational. Marcus didn't answer right away. Cold air slipped past him into the house. brushing against his skin, but he barely noticed. His focus was locked on the man standing just outside his door. "You found my address," Marcus said finally. It wasn't a question. Harold gave a slight nod. "Yes." No explanation. No attempt to soften it. Just the truth, sitting there between them. Marcus's grip tightened slightly on the door. "That's not normal." "No," Harold agreed. "It isn't." Another pause. The kind that stretched long enough to make everything feel heavier. Behind Harold, the man in the dark suit shifted his stance slightly, his silhouette outlined by the dim streetlight. He didn't speak, didn't move closer. Just stood there, watching. Marcus glanced at him briefly, then back at Harold. "You planning to tell me what this is?" Marcus asked. Harold studied him for a moment, as if weighing something. Then he said, "May I come in?" Marcus hesitated. Every instinct told him to be careful. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. This was something else. But then he thought about his mother, asleep down the hall. About the life he was already living. One where nothing changed. Where every day looked the same, where questions stayed unanswered. And something in him decided he needed to know. Marcus stepped back, opening the door wider. "5 minutes," he said. Harold inclined his head slightly. "That will be enough." He stepped inside. The man in the suit remained outside, closing the car door quietly behind him. Marcus shut the door. The sound echoed softly through the house. Inside, the warmth felt different now. Not comforting. Tense. Harold took a slow look around. The worn furniture. The peeling paint near the baseboards. The oxygen machine humming softly in the corner. His gaze lingered on it just a moment longer than everything else. Then he turned back to Marcus. "You live here with your mother," he said. Marcus stiffened. "Yeah." Harold nodded once. "Angela Reed, 64. Chronic health conditions, limited access to consistent care." Marcus's jaw tightened. "You been doing your homework?" "I've been paying attention," Harold replied. That answer didn't help. Marcus crossed his arms. "To what?" "To you." The words landed heavier than they should have. Marcus let out a short breath. "Look, I don't know what kind of game this is. It's not a game." Harold's voice didn't rise, but it cut through the room anyway. Marcus stopped. Harold stepped closer, not aggressively, but with intention. "Last night," he said, "you made a decision." Marcus frowned. "I bought 2 people dinner. That's it." "No," Harold said quietly. "That's not it." Silence. Marcus felt it again. That shift, like the conversation wasn't where he thought it was. "Most people," Harold continued, "would have looked away, told themselves it wasn't their problem, saved what little they had for themselves." Marcus shrugged. "Maybe. You didn't. That doesn't make me special." Harold held his gaze. "It makes you rare." Marcus looked away for a second, shaking his head. "You don't even know me." Harold didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat. Marcus tensed again, but Harold pulled out a folder. Simple, clean, organized. He placed it gently on the table between them. "I know more than you think," he said. Marcus stared at it, didn't touch it. "What is that?" he asked. "Open it." Marcus hesitated. Then slowly, he reached forward. The paper felt heavier than it should. He flipped it open and froze. His name, typed clearly at the top. Marcus Reed. Below it, Pages. Information. His job at Murphy's. His work history. His address. Even notes. Detailed. Too detailed. Marcus's heart started to pound. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. Harold didn't answer. Marcus turned another page. More notes. Helps elderly neighbor with groceries every Tuesday. Another page. Volunteers minor repairs without compensation. Another. Consistent employment despite financial hardship. Marcus slammed the folder shut. "You've been watching me," he said. Not confused. Not questioning. Certain. Harold met his eyes. "Yes." The room went still. Marcus took a step back. "For how long?" 3 days. 3 days, Marcus repeated, disbelief creeping in. "You've been following me for 3 days?" "Observing," Harold corrected. "That's not better." "No," Harold admitted, "but it's accurate." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the room. "This is crazy," he said under his breath. "It's necessary." Marcus stopped, turned. "Necessary for what?" Harold didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the hallway, toward the faint hum of the oxygen machine, then back at Marcus. "For what comes next?" Marcus shook his head. "No. No, you don't get to just say that and leave it there." Harold stepped closer again, and this time, there was no distance left between them. "You were not chosen by accident, Marcus." The words hit harder than anything else so far. Marcus's chest tightened. "Chosen for what?" Harold held his gaze, and for the first time, there was no softness left in his expression. Only truth. "For an opportunity," he said. "An opportunity that could change your life." Marcus let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Yeah? And what does that cost me?" Harold didn't hesitate. "Nothing you haven't already shown you're willing to give." Marcus frowned, because suddenly, this didn't feel like a threat. It felt like something else. Something bigger. Something real. He looked down at the folder again, then back up. "Start talking," Marcus said quietly. Harold nodded once, and as the silence settled around them, it became clear. Whatever Marcus thought this was, he had only seen the surface, because the truth had just walked through his front door. Marcus didn't move, didn't sit, didn't even blink for a second too long. The room felt smaller now, like the walls had shifted closer, tightening around the conversation that neither of them could step away from anymore. Harold stood across from him, calm as ever, like he had all the time in the world. Marcus didn't. "Start talking," Marcus said again, his voice lower now, sharper. "Because right now, this feels like something I didn't sign up for." Harold nodded once, acknowledging the weight behind the words. "That's fair." He glanced briefly toward the hallway again, then back to Marcus. 3 days ago, Harold began, "I arrived in this city with a purpose." Marcus crossed his arms, his guard still up. "Yeah? And that purpose was following me around?" "No," Harold said evenly. "The purpose was finding someone." Marcus let out a breath through his nose. "And you picked me." Harold didn't hesitate. "Yes." Silence. Not disbelief this time. Something closer to resistance. "Why?" Marcus asked. Harold stepped closer to the table, placing both hands lightly against the edge of it. "Because your name kept coming up." Marcus frowned. "From who?" "From people who don't usually agree on anything," Harold said. "Your employer? Your neighbors? Local business owners? Even people who had no reason to remember you, except that you helped them." Marcus shook his head slightly. That doesn't mean anything? It means everything, Harold replied. Marcus's jaw tightened. Look, I'm not some kind of... You're exactly what we were looking for. The interruption was calm, but final. Marcus stared at him. We? He asked. Harold reached into his coat again. This time he pulled out a card. Not the kind Marcus had seen before. Thick, clean, the edges sharp, the print precise. He placed it on the table. Marcus looked down. Whitmore Development Group. The name sat there in bold lettering, simple but unmistakable. Underneath it, Charles Harold Whitmore, Chief Executive Officer. Marcus didn't pick it up right away, but he recognized the name. Not clearly, not fully, but enough. I've seen this before, Marcus said slowly. Most people have, Harold replied. Marcus let out a small, disbelieving laugh. You're telling me you're that Whitmore? Harold didn't react, because he didn't need to. Marcus looked back at the folder, then at the man standing in his house. You're a CEO, Marcus said. You got people, you got money, you got whatever this is. He gestured toward the papers. So why are you here? Harold didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow breath. Because money isn't the problem anymore, he said. Marcus frowned. What is? People, Harold said simply. The word hung there, heavy. Marcus leaned back slightly, trying to make sense of it. We've built projects all over this country, Harold continued. Housing developments, commercial centers, infrastructure, billions of dollars invested. He paused. And still, some places don't change. Marcus didn't respond, because he knew exactly what kind of places Harold meant. This city, Harold said, glancing around briefly, has been studied for months, not just by analysts, by people on the ground. Marcus felt his chest tighten slightly. People like me? He asked. Yes. Harold's answer came without hesitation. Marcus shook his head. So you come in, watch people struggle, take notes, and then what? Pick someone like it's a job interview? That's one way to look at it, Harold admitted. And the other? Harold stepped closer. The other, he said, is that we look for someone who already does the work, before anyone offers them anything. Marcus's expression hardened slightly. That's what this is? He asked. A test? Harold didn't look away. Yes. The word landed harder than anything else so far. Marcus let out a short breath, running a hand over his face. You set that up, he said. Last night. The rain, the story, the missing wallet. Harold didn't interrupt. Marcus's voice dropped. That was all planned. Yes. The room went still. Marcus took a step back, not in fear, in disbelief. You let me think, he started, then stopped himself. That you were desperate, Harold finished. Marcus nodded once, slow, tight. And you weren't. No. Marcus let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Yeah, he said. I figured that part out. Silence stretched again. But this time it wasn't confusion. It was something else. Something sharper. You ever think, Marcus said, his voice steady but edged, that maybe that's not right? Harold didn't flinch. Testing people like that. To see what they do when they don't know they're being watched? Marcus met his eyes. That's not fair. No, Harold said. It's not. The honesty caught Marcus off guard. But it's the only way to see the truth, Harold continued. What truth? Marcus asked. Character, Harold said. The word echoed in the room. Marcus shook his head. You could have just asked, and you could have given me the answer you thought I wanted, Harold replied. Marcus opened his mouth, then stopped, because he knew that was true. Harold nodded slightly. What we needed to know was what you would do when there was no reward, no recognition, no reason. Marcus looked away, back toward the kitchen, toward the quiet hallway. You already know what I did, he said. Yes, Harold replied. And? Harold's voice softened, just slightly. You didn't hesitate. Marcus exhaled slowly. Because now, the anger wasn't as loud, still there, but not as sharp. You played me, Marcus said. No, Harold said quietly. We revealed you. Marcus looked back at him. That landed differently. Not defensive, not aggressive, just clear. We created a moment, Harold continued. You made the choice. Marcus stared at him, trying to decide whether to push back or listen. And what happens now? Marcus asked. Harold straightened slightly. For you? He said. Yes. Harold held his gaze. Now, he said, we talk about what comes next. Marcus's chest tightened again, not from fear, from something else, something closer to anticipation. Because whatever this was, it wasn't small, it wasn't random, and it definitely wasn't over, not even close. The room felt different now, not quieter, not louder, just heavier. Marcus stood there, arms still crossed, the folder on the table between them like it had a pulse of its own. The hum of the oxygen machine in the corner filled the silence, steady and real, something familiar in a moment that wasn't. So, Marcus said slowly, what comes next? Harold didn't rush to answer. He moved toward the table, opening the folder again, not with urgency, but with intention, like every motion mattered. An opportunity, he repeated. Marcus let out a short breath. You said that already. And I meant it. Harold turned the folder so it faced Marcus again, but this time, it wasn't just notes. It was something else, printed documents, official, structured. Marcus stepped closer, his eyes scanning the pages. University logos, multiple, recognizable. Some of the biggest names he'd only ever seen on billboards or commercials. What is this? Marcus asked, his voice quieter now. A full academic sponsorship, Harold said. Any accredited university you choose. Tuition, housing, materials, living expenses. Marcus blinked. Once, then again. He didn't move. Come on, he said almost under his breath. That's not real. It is. Marcus shook his head slowly, stepping back. No, people don't just walk into someone's house and offer that. Harold watched him carefully. People like me do. Marcus looked at him again. Really looked this time. Not the man from the diner. Not the soaked figure from the storm. The CEO. The one with resources. The one who could make things happen. And suddenly, it didn't feel impossible anymore. It felt dangerous. What's the catch? Marcus asked. Harold didn't hesitate. There isn't one. Marcus let out a small laugh, sharper this time. There's always a catch. Margaret's voice came from the doorway behind Harold. You're right, she said gently. Marcus turned. She had stepped inside quietly, her presence almost unnoticed until now. Her coat was draped neatly over her arm, her posture composed, her eyes kind, but observant. The catch, she continued, is responsibility. Marcus frowned. That's not a catch. It is if you're not ready for it. Marcus didn't respond, because something in her tone made that land differently. Harold nodded slightly. The education is only the beginning. He reached deeper into the folder and pulled out another set of documents. These were different, larger, blueprints. Marcus stepped forward again, drawn in despite himself. Lines, layouts, detailed plans. "What am I looking at?" he asked. Harold spread them out across the table. "A community development center," he said. Marcus stared. The images were clear. Modern buildings, glass panels, open spaces, offices, medical rooms, training facilities. Everything his neighborhood didn't have. Everything it needed. "Location?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Harold tapped the corner of the blueprint. "East Detroit." Marcus's chest tightened. "That's..." He paused. "That's right near here." "Yes." Marcus looked up. "Why?" Harold met his gaze. "Because this community has been overlooked for too long." Marcus let out a breath. "Yeah, no argument there." "And because," Harold continued, "it needs someone who understands it." Marcus shook his head. "You got city officials for that. Consultants. Planners." "We do," Harold said. "And they don't live here." Silence. Marcus glanced back at the plans, at the scale of it, at what it could mean. "This isn't cheap," he said. "No," Harold replied. "It isn't." "How much?" Harold didn't flinch. 20 million. The number didn't land right away. It just hung there. Too big. Too distant. Marcus let out a slow breath. "That's not a project. That's a whole new world." "Yes," Harold said. "It is." Marcus looked at him again. "And you want me to, what? Watch it get built?" "No." Harold's answer was immediate. "I want you to lead it." The words hit harder than anything else that night. Marcus blinked, then laughed. Not because it was funny, because it didn't make sense. "You serious?" he asked. "Completely." Marcus shook his head, stepping back again. No, No." "Why not?" Harold asked. Marcus gestured around the room. "Look at this place. Look at me. I wash dishes for a living." "And you take care of your mother," Margaret added softly. Marcus didn't look at her. "You help your neighbors," Harold continued. "You give what little you have without expecting anything in return." Marcus's jaw tightened. "That doesn't make me qualified to run something like that." "It makes you exactly the kind of person who should." Marcus shook his head again. "You don't get it?" "Then help me understand." Marcus took a breath, running his hands through his hair. "You're talking about money I've never even seen," he said. "Decisions that affect people's lives. That's not something you just hand to someone like me." "Someone like you?" Harold repeated. Marcus met his eyes. "Yeah," he said. "Someone who's been overlooked his whole life." Harold nodded slowly. "That's exactly why." Marcus paused. "Because that didn't feel like a compliment. It felt like something deeper." "You've seen what this place needs," Harold continued. "Not from reports, not from meetings, from living it." Marcus didn't respond. Because he had. Every day. "And more importantly," Harold added, "you've shown what you're willing to do for it." Marcus's eyes dropped to the table, to the empty space where his meal had been the night before. "You gave up your dinner," Harold said quietly. "Without hesitation. Without expectation." Marcus let out a breath. "It was just food." "No," Harold said. "It was a choice." Silence filled the room again. Marcus stood there, caught between two worlds, the one he knew and the one being offered to him. "What if I fail?" he asked finally. Harold didn't hesitate. "Then you fail trying to help people," he said. "And that's not failure." Marcus looked up for the first time. The fear wasn't just about the offer. It was about what it meant. "You'd have support," Margaret said. "Training. A team. You wouldn't be doing this alone." Marcus nodded slowly, but his mind was racing now, because this wasn't just an opportunity. It was a responsibility, a weight, a chance to change everything, or lose it. He looked back at Harold. "Why me?" he asked again. Harold's answer came without hesitation. "Because when no one was watching," he said, "you chose to give anyway." Marcus stood there, silent, because for the first time, he didn't have an argument, only a decision, and he wasn't ready to make it. Not yet. The room stayed quiet long after Harold finished speaking. Not the kind of quiet that felt peaceful, the kind that pressed in from all sides, asking questions Marcus didn't have answers to. He looked down at the blueprints again. The clean lines, the polished designs, everything laid out like it already existed, like someone had already decided this future was real. But Marcus knew better. Nothing in his life had ever been that simple. "You're asking me to step into something I don't even understand," he said finally. Harold didn't interrupt. "That's fair," he replied. Marcus let out a slow breath, pacing once across the room. His footsteps echoed softly against the worn wooden floor. "You're talking about college, money, a whole building with my name on it," Marcus continued. "That's not just a job. That's everything." "Yes," Harold said. Marcus stopped walking. "And what happens if I say no?" Harold didn't hesitate. "Then we respect your decision." Marcus frowned. "Just like that?" "Yes. No pressure, no strings." "No strings," Harold repeated. Marcus studied him carefully, because something about that answer felt honest. Too honest. "You'd still get the education offer," Margaret added gently. "That part doesn't change." Marcus looked at her. "Why?" "Because what you did already proved enough," she said. The words settled in deeper than anything else that night. Not because they were grand, because they were simple. Marcus ran a hand over his face, exhaling slowly. He walked to the window, pulling the curtain back just slightly. Outside, the street was still. The car sat quietly at the curb, the man in the suit leaning against it now, hands folded in front of him. Waiting. Everything about this moment felt unreal, like he had stepped into someone else's life without realizing it. "You ever feel like—" Marcus began, then paused. "Like what?" Harold asked. Marcus stared out into the darkness. "Like everything you've been building your life around suddenly isn't enough anymore." Harold didn't answer right away, because he understood that question. "I've felt that," he said eventually. Marcus let out a quiet breath. "I know what my life looks like," Marcus continued. "I know what I can handle. I know how to get through each day." He turned back toward them. "But this?" He gestured toward the table. "This is something else." "Yes," Harold said again. Marcus shook his head slightly. "You're asking me to believe I can do something I've never even seen done before." "No," Harold corrected gently. "I'm asking you to believe what you've already been doing matters more than you think." Marcus's jaw tightened, because that didn't feel like the same thing. "Helping people with groceries isn't the same as running a $20 million project," Marcus said. "No," Harold agreed. "It's harder." Marcus frowned. Because no one pays attention to the small things, Harold continued. There's no recognition, no reward, just the decision to show up anyway. Marcus looked at him, unsure whether to agree or push back. Money builds structures, Harold said. But people build trust, and without that, nothing lasts. Marcus didn't speak, because that part felt true. He looked down at his hands. Rough, calloused, worn from work that never seemed to end. Those hands, Harold said quietly, following his gaze, have done more for people than most boardrooms ever will. Marcus let out a small, almost bitter laugh. Yeah, he said. Doesn't pay the bills, though. No, Harold said, but it changes lives. Marcus shook his head. You keep saying that like it's enough. It is, Margaret said softly. Marcus looked at her. You don't fix everything overnight, she continued. You start with one decision, then another, and another. Her eyes held his. You already know how to do that. Marcus stood there, still, because deep down, he did. That's what scared him. Not the offer, not the money, the possibility that he might actually be capable of something more. You don't have to decide tonight, Harold said. Marcus looked up. I don't? No, Harold replied. Take time. Think about it. Ask yourself what kind of life you want to build. Marcus nodded slowly. That felt right. Because right now everything was moving too fast, too big, too far outside what he understood. I'll need time, Marcus said. You have it, Harold assured him. Marcus glanced back at the blueprints one more time, at the future they represented. Then he looked toward the hallway, toward his mother, toward the life he had been holding together piece by piece. You know, Marcus said quietly, she always told me something. Harold waited. That being broke doesn't mean being empty. Harold nodded slowly. She's right. Marcus let out a breath. Maybe, he said. Silence settled again. But this time, it wasn't heavy, it was open, like something had shifted, not decided, but possible. Harold stepped back slightly, straightening his coat. We'll be in touch, he said. Marcus nodded. I figured. Margaret offered a small smile. Good night, Marcus. Good night. They moved toward the door. Harold paused for just a moment before stepping out. Then he turned slightly. One more thing, he said. Marcus looked at him. Whatever you decide, Harold added, don't make the mistake of thinking this started tonight. Marcus frowned slightly. What do you mean? Harold's expression softened. Just a fraction. This started the moment you chose to care when no one else did. Marcus didn't answer, because he didn't know how to. Harold stepped outside. The door closed quietly behind him. The engine of the car started moments later. Headlights swept across the room again, then faded. And just like that, they were gone. Marcus stood there alone, the folder still on the table, the house quiet again. But nothing felt the same, because now, the question wasn't what they wanted from him. It was what he was willing to become. The answer didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, in quiet mornings where Marcus sat at the kitchen table long before the sun came up, staring at the folder like it might explain itself if he looked hard enough. In long walks through East Detroit, past the same broken sidewalks and boarded-up buildings he had seen his whole life, but now, seeing them differently, not just as they were, but as they could be. He took Harold's advice. He didn't rush. He visited. He listened. He asked questions he had never thought to ask before. The first time he stepped into one of the Whitmore Foundation's existing centers, he didn't say much. He just stood near the entrance, hands in his pockets, watching. People moved through the space with purpose. Adults sat at computers, learning skills that felt out of reach just months before. Others spoke quietly with counselors, planning next steps. Real steps, not just survival. In the back, a small medical clinic buzzed with steady activity, not rushed, not overwhelmed. Just working. Marcus noticed the details, how people greeted each other by name, how staff listened, really listened, instead of rushing conversations along, how the space didn't feel like charity. It felt like opportunity. He visited another center, then another, each one different, shaped by the community around it, but all of them grounded in the same thing: trust. That was the part that stayed with him. Not the buildings, not the equipment. The trust. "You can't build this with money alone," Marcus said quietly one afternoon, standing beside Harold as they watched a group of adults leave a training session. "No," Harold replied. "You can't." Marcus glanced at him. "You need people to believe it's theirs." Harold nodded once. "Exactly." That's when Marcus started to understand. Not everything, but enough. The decision didn't feel impossible anymore. It felt heavy, but real. 2 weeks later, Marcus stood outside Murphy's Diner again. The neon sign buzzed above him, just like always. The windows glowed the same warm yellow. Inside, the same sounds echoed: plates, voices, the steady rhythm of people passing through their day. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. He pushed the door open. The bell chimed. Sandy looked up immediately. "Well, look who finally decided to show his face." Marcus smiled faintly. "Miss me?" "Don't push it," she shot back, though her grin gave her away. "You've been gone 2 weeks. Mike's been grumbling like an old engine." Right on cue, Mike's voice came from the kitchen. "That you, Marcus?" "Yeah." Mike stepped out, wiping his hands on a towel. He looked Marcus up and down once, then nodded. "You quitting or coming back?" Marcus let out a small breath. That question, simple, direct. "I'm transitioning," Marcus said. Mike raised an eyebrow. "That what they call it now?" Marcus chuckled lightly. "Something like that?" Sandy crossed her arms. "You gonna tell us what's going on, or keep being mysterious?" Marcus hesitated. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out the folder, and set it on the counter. "I got an opportunity," he said. Sandy leaned in, flipping it open. Her eyes widened. "Wait, what is this?" she asked, scanning the pages. Mike stepped closer, reading over her shoulder. His expression didn't change much, but his silence said everything. "They want you to run this?" Sandy asked, her voice rising slightly. "Help build it," Marcus corrected. "Same difference," she muttered. Mike looked at Marcus again. Longer this time. "You taking it?" he asked. Marcus nodded slowly. "Yeah." The word landed differently than anything else he had said before. Not uncertain, not hesitant, certain. Mike nodded once. "Then don't screw it up." Marcus smiled faintly. "That's the plan." Sandy shook her head, still half in disbelief. "You better not forget us when you're all big and important." Marcus leaned against the counter. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. And for the first time, he meant it in a different way. Because now, staying didn't mean being stuck. It meant building something. Months passed, then more. Construction started on the abandoned lot just a few blocks from Marcus's house. The old buildings came down first, slowly, piece by piece, like the past, making room for something new. Then the foundation. Steel beams rising against the skyline, glass panels reflecting sunlight instead of shadows. People started to notice. At first, it was curiosity, then interest, then something stronger, hope. Marcus was there almost every day, not behind a desk, not giving orders from a distance, on the ground, talking to workers, meeting with community members, listening, always listening. Angela watched it all from their front porch. Her health had improved, slowly, steadily, with access to better care. "You see that?" she said one afternoon, pointing toward the rising structure in the distance. Marcus followed her gaze. The building stood tall now, not finished, but undeniable. "Yeah," he said. "That's yours." Marcus shook his head. "No," he said. "That's ours." Angela smiled softly. "That's what I meant." A year later, the doors opened. The Marcus Reed Community Center. He hadn't wanted his name on it, but Harold insisted. "People need to see what's possible," he had said. Inside, the space came alive. Job training programs, medical services, community meetings, every room filled with people who had once felt invisible, now seen, now supported. Marcus stood near the entrance on opening day, watching it all unfold. Sandy walked in, her eyes wide. "Well," she said, "I guess you didn't screw it up." Marcus laughed quietly. "Still working on it." Mike followed behind her, nodding once. "Not bad." Marcus looked around, at the people, at the movement, at the life inside something that didn't exist a year ago. And for a moment, everything felt still. Not because nothing was happening, because everything had come together. But even then, he knew this wasn't the end. Because something about the way it all began still hadn't fully come full circle. Not yet. The center stayed busy long after the ribbon cutting. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Marcus found himself moving through it all, not as someone trying to prove something anymore, but as someone carrying something forward. Each morning, the building came alive before the sun fully rose. Lights flickered on in the training rooms, coffee brewed in the communal kitchen. Voices echoed softly down the hallways, some hopeful, some tired, some uncertain, but all moving in the same direction. Forward. Marcus stood in his office, looking out through the glass wall that overlooked the main floor. People filled the space. A man in his 40s learning computer skills for the first time. A woman speaking quietly with a counselor, her hands steady but her eyes still searching for something. A group gathered around a table, planning something, small maybe, but real. This was what it looked like. Not a single moment, not one big change. 1,000 small ones, happening at the same time. Marcus exhaled slowly. For a moment, everything felt complete. But then, a soft knock at the door. He turned. Sandy stood there, one hand resting against the frame, her expression different than usual. Not playful, not teasing, serious. "Hey," she said. Marcus smiled faintly. "You here to check up on me again?" She didn't smile back. "There's something you need to see." Marcus's expression shifted. "What is it?" Sandy stepped inside, lowering her voice. "There's a couple at the diner." Marcus frowned slightly. "And?" "They can't pay." The words landed quietly, but they hit deeper than anything else that day. Marcus didn't move at first, didn't speak because suddenly, the room felt familiar again. Not this one. Another one. Fluorescent lights, rain against the windows, a plate sitting on the counter. This one's on me. Sandy watched him carefully. I know it's not your responsibility, she said. But when I saw them, I thought about that night. Marcus nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. He grabbed his jacket without another word. The drive to Murphy's felt shorter than it should have. The streets passed by in a blur, but his mind stayed locked on one thing. That booth, that moment, the choice. When he stepped inside the diner, nothing had changed. Same neon glow, same worn booths, same quiet hum of life moving forward. But at table 6, a different couple, younger, still adults but worn by something heavier than age. Their clothes were damp, not from rain this time, but from the kind of exhaustion that settles into people who've been moving too long without rest. The man sat with his head lowered slightly, counting coins in his hand. The woman stared at the table, her fingers gripping the edge like she was trying to hold herself steady. Sandy stood nearby, watching. Marcus walked toward them, each step steady, familiar. The man looked up as Marcus approached, his expression tense. Look, he said quickly, we're trying to figure it out. Marcus shook his head gently. It's okay. The woman blinked, confused. What? Marcus reached over, pulling a plate from the counter. He set it down in front of them, then another. This one's on me, he said. Silence. The same silence from before. Different people. Same moment. The man stared at the food like it didn't make sense. You don't have to do that, he said. Marcus smiled faintly. I know. The woman's eyes filled, just slightly. Thank you, she whispered. Marcus nodded once. No problem. He stepped back, letting them have the space, letting the moment belong to them. Sandy leaned against the counter beside him. You ever think about how weird this is? She asked quietly. Marcus glanced at her. How so? You were sitting right there once, she said. Now you're standing here. Marcus looked toward the booth, at the way the couple leaned closer, sharing the meal carefully, like it mattered. Because it did. Yeah, he said. I've thought about it. Sandy nudged his arm lightly. You think someone's watching you now? Marcus let out a small breath. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned his head slightly, toward the far corner of the diner. And there, standing just inside the door, Harold, not hidden, not pretending, just watching. The same calm expression, the same steady presence. Marcus held his gaze. For a moment, nothing else existed. Then Harold gave a small nod, not approval, not surprise. Recognition. Marcus nodded back. And just like that, it clicked. The test had never really ended. It had just changed. Sandy followed his line of sight. Is that? Marcus nodded once. Yeah. Harold turned slightly, stepping back toward the door. Before leaving, he paused, just long enough for Marcus to hear it. Some choices, Harold said quietly. Don't just echo. Marcus waited. They multiply. Then he stepped outside. The bell chimed softly, and he was gone. Marcus stood there for a moment longer. Then he looked back at the couple, at the meal, at the quiet exchange of gratitude that didn't need words. And for the first time, it all made sense. Not the money, not the opportunity. The reason. Because it was never about one moment. It was about what came after. Marcus stepped back behind the counter, not because he had to, because he wanted to, because this was where it started, and this was where it would keep going. The neon light buzzed softly overhead. Outside, the city moved on like it always did. But inside, something had changed. Not just for him, for everyone. And somewhere in that quiet, steady rhythm of life continuing forward, one simple truth remained. Kindness didn't end when it changed your life. It became who you were. If this story touched you, leave a comment below. Because in the end, it wasn't the $20 million center or the title that defined Marcus Reed. It was the moment he stood in that same diner again, looked at two strangers in need, and said, "This one's on me." One simple choice made without hesitation turned into something bigger than he ever imagined. Proof that a single moment of courage can change the entire direction of a life. And here's the truth you can carry with you today. You don't need a perfect plan or the right timing to make a difference. The next time you see someone struggling, just pause and choose to act the same way Marcus did, even when no one is watching. Have you ever made a small decision that ended up changing something much bigger in your life? Tell me in the comments below. I'd really like to hear your story. And if you think this was powerful, wait until you see what happens in the next story.